politics is a mandatory pay-to-win server where the admins are actively trying to get fired, the lore is completely made up, and the main gameplay loop consists of arguing with strangers until your blood pressure physically damages your internal organs. It is a system that successfully took over the concept of human progress, monetized the misery, and dumped it all into the digital cesspool known as Twitter.
It's called X. You done changed it like 4 years ago. You have to call it X.
Right. Twitter. Welcome to the current meta. A completely unoptimized sandbox where elected officials treat classified documents like rare Pokemon cards. Where the strategy for passing the national budget is a game of chicken played by people who haven't personally purchased their own groceries since 1998. Where lobbyists passion daily microtransactions, filibusters function as unskippable 4-hour cutscenes, and the development team is mostly comprised of people who legally qualify for early-stage memory care. It is a chaotic, unbalanced, spectacularly broken piece of software. And yet, every 4 years we are forced to log back in for the server reset. What is politics, really? According to the modern political science,
it is the automatic allocation of socio-economic resources to the monopolization of legitimate violence and bureaucratic coercion.
You got it? Neither do I. Anyways, in this video, I'm going to talk about the American political system, despite living in a country that I physically cannot point to on a map. Why? Because talking about America is what makes me the most money. Introducing the government. A multi-trillion-dollar mandatory subscription service you cannot cancel, where old people spend their taxes to bomb people you've never met. It is comprised of the executive, congressional, and judicial branches. Their main job, as envisioned by founding father George Washington, is to actively fuck each other over so that absolutely nothing gets done. Historically, this is referenced as checks and balances. First, the executive branch. This consists of the president and his cabinet of unelected friends. His primary function is to sign pieces of paper, veto other pieces of paper, and try not to fall down the stairs on international television. Second, the congressional branch. A collection of 535 millionaires who work approximately 100 days a year. Their job is to draft 2,000 pages of documents they haven't actually read, while aggressively tweeting at each other and engaging in perfectly legal insider trading. Finally, the judicial branch. 9 people wearing fancy bathrobes who are appointed for life, meaning they physically cannot be fired no matter how weird they get. Their job is to stare at a piece of parchment written by men who own the wooden teeth, and use it to decide if we are legally allowed to use the internet. Together, they form a perfect frictionless machine of mutual sabotage. But wait, you might ask, if the 9 bathrobes have the ultimate privilege to violently fuck with the other 2 branches of government, who appoints them? To answer that, we have to look at the people who controls the appointment. Because whoever controls the bathrobes controls the meta. Introducing the two-party system, a political duopoly created by the terminally insane. In a functional society, a political party exists to represent the nuanced, diverse interests of its citizens. Here, their main job is to run a multi-billion-dollar marketing campaign, traveling across the country to promise exactly how they are going to fuck you over if they win. Then, by some statistical miracle, they get elected, and they immediately manage to fuck you over even harder than they originally promised. And after the damage is done, they proceed to do absolutely fuck all. They spend the remainder of their 46-year term sitting in taxpayer-funded ergonomic chairs, composing vaguely threatening tweets at 2 AM, and waiting for the server to reset so they can send you a text message asking for another $20. Now, you might be thinking, surely, they have fundamentally different economic philosophies. And you would be wrong. They are just a cosmetic palette swap of the exact same financial ruin. The blue team's strategy is simple. They are going to take all your money and spend it on things that sounds incredibly empathetic in a press release, but somehow result in a multi-trillion-dollar deficit, like funding a $4 million federal study to find out if hamsters get seasonal depression. Spoiler alert, they do. The red team's strategy is slightly different. They are going to aggressively talk about the blue team spending your money, and then they are going to take all of your money to buy 3,000 experimental stealth tanks that the Pentagon explicitly begged them not to build because they catch fire on the rain. In both scenarios, your wallet is empty, the infrastructure is crumbling, and the national debt looks like a phone number with an area code you don't recognize. Which brings us to the actual gameplay loop, the voting process. If you're a casual player, you probably think that the goal of an election year is for a politician to convince the most people to vote for them. This is beginner level thinking. The high level meta of an American election is to aggressively prevent the other team's player base from actually voting. Or, at the very least, make sure the wrong kind of people can play the game. They achieve this through a highly optimized system of administrative griefing. First, they draw voting districts that looks like a hallucinating octopus so your vote mathematically doesn't matter. Then, they are going to put the only polling station in your county at the top of a geographically hostile mountain. They reduce the operating hours to a 15-minute window on a Tuesday where you are legally required to be at work. And just to make sure you know who is in charge, they make it a literal crime for anyone to hand you a bottle of water while you stand in line for 6 hours. It is the most advanced, heavily funded obstacle course in human history, all to decide which senior citizen gets the nuclear lunch codes. So, you navigated the obstacle course, you stood in the rain, you cast your ballot. You think you have directly contributed to the democratic process. This is where the developers introduced the most universally hated mechanic in the entire game, the Electoral College. You see, you aren't actually voting for the president. That would be logical. That would be a 1-to-1 input-to-output ratio. Instead, you are voting for an anonymous guy who represents your state, who promises to eventually go to a room in December and vote for the president on your behalf. It was designed primarily because the founders rode on horses, didn't have group chats, and explicitly did not trust you personally to make a good decision. The system assigns a fixed point value to every state based roughly on population. You need 270 points to win the election. But because the system hasn't received an update in a century, the math is entirely broken. In 48 out of 50 states, they use a winner-takes-all rule set. If you win a state by exactly one single vote, you are awarded 100% of the state's points. The other 4.9 million people who voted for the other guy is instantly reduced to atoms. Because of this, the entire national election actually only takes place in about 7 states. If you live in New York, Texas, or California, congratulations! Your vote is basically background noise. The multi-billion-dollar fate of the free world is entirely decided by a couple of undecided factory workers in Pennsylvania who are just trying to eat their lunch in peace. This creates a mathematically hilarious scenario where you can get a high score in the popular vote and still lose the entire game. And why is the grand prize for surviving this broken, 250 years old Mario Party minigame? You get to become the President of the United States. You win the privilege of moving into a 200 years old museum, where half the country actively hopes you fall off your bike, and the other half expects you to personally lower the price of eggs using only a Sharpie. So, you are the executive branch. Your daily gameplay loop consists of 3 distinct options. Option 1. Do absolutely fuck all while waving at helicopters. Option 2. Attempting to pass a bill. This is a 12-month escort mission where the NPC actively tries to jump off a bridge at every checkpoint, which usually forces player to rely on option 3, the executive order. The executive order is basically console commands. You bypass the entire legislative engine, write "make things happen" on a piece of paper, and for about 4 months it happens, until a random judge in Texas tells you to stop. But if you want permanent laws, you have to go through the legislative branch, Congress, a room of 80 years old with early stage Alzheimer's who are legally responsible for deciding if a child should be allowed to have legs. Their primary objective is to make sure the government continues to do absolutely nothing. And to achieve this, they use an exploit called the filibuster. The filibuster is a mechanic where a single person can pause the entire server just by refusing to stop talking. You don't even need a relevant argument. You can just read the dictionary out loud, or talk about Dr. Seuss for 16 hours, to successfully prevent the government from fixing a bridge. Now, occasionally, Congress does pass something, but it is rarely because it's a good idea. It is usually because an expert consultant, also known as a lobbyist, suggested it. Coincidentally, this expert is fully funded by a pharmaceutical company, and their helpful suggestion comes with a highly generous, completely legal campaign donation directly into the politician's pocket. It is the most blatant pay-to-win microtransaction in the world, but because they were ties, we call it lobbying instead of bribery. And finally, if a bill somehow survives the escort mission, the filibusters, the corporate microtransactions, it faces the final boss, the bathrooms, SCOTUS. The Supreme Court is obligated to review a new law to see if it violates a piece of parchment written 250 years ago by men who didn't understand what Jones wrote. Their decisions are final. They are unappealable. They dictate the civil rights of 330 million people. And they are mathematically proven to depend heavily on whether or not the judge had eaten lunch recently. Because yes, there are actual studies showing that judges hand out significantly harsher sentences when their blood sugar is low. Your constitutional freedoms are entirely dependent on whether a 75 years old remember to eat a Snickers bar at 11:30 in the morning. But before we talk about the endgame, we need to acknowledge how the absurdity had scaled up. Because the government has perfected the art of the distraction. Whenever a 500-page legal document drops proving half the ruling class took a weekend's vacation to a convicted child predator's private island, they immediately pivots to jingling the Dow Jones in front of her face like he's in front of a toddler.
The Dow right now
is over. The Dow is over $50,000.
I don't know why you're laughing.
Yes, your senator is a monster, but look at the S&P 500. The line is going up. Your 401k is theoretically safe. And who controls this sacred multi-trillion-dollar economy? Complex fiscal policy? The Federal Reserve? No. The global financial stability of the free world is currently dictated by a 3 AM rage post on Truth Social. The entire stock market can violently crash because a 78 years old in a bathrobe decided to type in all caps about a washing machine company. And the blue team isn't doing any better. They just packaged the absurdity in better PR. 10 years ago, they gave us a president who could deliver a flawless, charismatic, mathematically perfect speech about the audacity of hope, right before authorizing a drone to vaporize a wedding in Yemen. Because no matter who is holding the pen in the Oval Office, the ultimate function of the United States military remains exactly the same: to deploy globally, with trillions of dollars in bleeding edge weaponry, all to defend the most vulnerable, helpless minority on planet Earth. Multi-billion-dollar oil executives. We are basically a private security firm with a national anthem. And why do we spend trillions of dollars a year defending ExxonMobil's profit margins instead of fixing the potholes in your neighborhood? Because eventually, these politicians have to retire. And when they do, they don't just go to a farm upstate. Introducing the revolving door. When a politician finally loses an election, they don't go on unemployment, they don't update their LinkedIn. They just say whoops, and instantly becomes a lobbyist or a senior consultant. They take their advancing Alzheimer's, walk right back into the exact same congressional chambers, and start telling their former colleagues that having human kneecaps should really be treated more as a suggestion. A bold philosophical stance they are taking, while, entirely by coincidence, being paid 7 figures by the National Coalition of Kneecap Removal. The entire system is a concrete bunker. It is explicitly built so that structural change is functionally impossible, and the massive soulless corporations always win. So, knowing all of this, why should you vote? You shouldn't vote because you think you are going to save the world. You aren't. You should vote purely out of spite. You should vote because making these ghouls sweat through their spray tans for 6 hours on a Tuesday night is the only legal form of psychological warfare you have left. If the system is a joke, make them pay for the punchline. Make them spend another $4 billion of corporate money on attack gas just to keep their jobs. Go to the polls, stand in the rain, and explicitly let the dipshit sitting eaters taxpayer fund economic shares know, definitely, that you hate them. Wait a minute, why am I getting so worked up over American politics? I live in a third world country in the middle of nowhere.